Hey, good evening, everybody. Hey, Matthew, I can definitely hear you, brother. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
No doubt, no doubt. Hey, everybody. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Very excited to be here. And it is a special time in the transportation world. It is International Road Check Week. So that means 3 days of a total blitz. Everybody and everyone from the FMCSA to all of those Department of Safety motor vehicle officers are out here checking hard. And Matt, what is this year's topic? What are they checking for today, this week, brother?
The real focus this week is going to be on wheel end. So, over the next 72 hours, 15 trucks or buses will be inspected every single minute all across North America.
Wow. Wow. Say that again because I never put it in quite those statistics. You said how many buses, how many trucks, and how quick a time?
15 trucks or buses will be inspected on average every single minute for the next 72 hours. There will be tens of thousands of vehicles that will be inspected all across North America. And it's going to be fascinating because we've been doing this for a long time. And these results that happen are very surprising. We're going to talk about that in a little while, but a lot more of these vehicles are going to be out of service than most people expect.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I pray that everybody has been on their P's and Q's and they have all of their stuff together. But we'll get into that. But without further ado, everyone, my name is Jory Myers. Thank you so much for joining us today, owner of Atlanta Dispatch LLC. And today we have a friend to the stage. We have Matt. Matt, can you please introduce yourself for the folks who, they might not have heard of you so far. They haven't had an opportunity to check out your podcast. Can you introduce yourself, brother?
Thank you so much, Joy. Well, my name is Matthew Leffler. I am an attorney. I'm a Christian. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a brother. And I'm a son. I've been in this business for about a decade now, but before I ever got into the business, my dad was with Roadway back in the early 1970s, and he had a chance to work with some of the largest carriers in the country, started his own business back in the early 90s doing outsourced repair and maintenance. And my dad was nothing if not a literal person. So the company he created was a business called Outsourced Fleet Services. We grew that business to over 100 mechanics. And in 2018, we sold the business to a company called Dickinson Fleet Services, and I went on to work with those guys. So it's been a pleasure getting in the supply chain. And for my own time, I've been in the business of repairing and maintaining private fleets, for hire carriers, LTLs, and truckloads, and intermodal, and everything in between. The last couple of years, I've been in software. So I worked with a company called Decisive, which is a type of software that Mac and Volvo and PACCAR use for their dealerships. I went on to an asset sharing platform, and then I doing my own thing for a couple of weeks now. So it's a great pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to talk about maintenance and supply chain.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here on stage with us today. So thank you again for your time. And now that we have you here, we're on stage. What you've serviced a lot of customers. You just said for hire carriers, private fleets, all the above. And when it comes down to it, what do you feel like are some of the pros of having this type of week? Like what does it mean for the industry to have a blitz week?
It is important to show people just how many commercial vehicles are going to be found to be out of service. Just last year, when we were doing the International Road Check in 2021, 40,000 commercial vehicles were inspected. 6,710 were placed out of service. That's 16.5% of commercial vehicles were not safe to operate on the road. And these numbers aren't an aberration. Just the year before, there was 50,000 vehicles inspected. 20% of them were put out of service. So the thing that I really focus on, what people need to understand, is that you cannot defer maintenance. You cannot defer maintenance for yourself. You can't defer maintenance for your mental health, and you certainly can't defer maintenance for your commercial vehicle.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I agree with that being the reason why it's important to have these safety checks, just to make sure that fleet owners are understanding of the value and the importance of maintaining and keeping your vehicle safe. So the fact that the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance has been doing this since 1988, I do feel like it's a great thing. But as a dispatcher, as someone who is responsible for making sure that a fleet has profitable freight to move from origin to destination, I've kind of caught wind that some fleet owners they don't like moving during this time. They prefer to sit their trucks versus to get out there. And I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, the thing is, for so many truck drivers, if you're not driving, you're not making money. And during this Blitz week, a lot of stuff gets put in the way. There's a lot of roadblocks, a lot of delays. So I see the value for some people saying, hey, I'm going to take some time off. I'm going to relax. But the fact of the matter is that we want to have safe vehicles on the highways. There's the hardest job in this country is safely delivering freight on time and undamaged. And when things aren't maintained, that's when you have interruptions of service. That's when you have an unplanned maintenance event. So for a fleet that says, look, I don't want to be inspected, I don't want those delays, I don't want those headaches, I don't want those fines, understand that you might defer maintenance now, but you're going to pay for it later. And when you're doing unplanned maintenance, it's usually 2 times more expensive when it's unplanned than when you plan it. Jory, you're muted, bud.
Oh, sorry about that. Because I was gone. I was excited. I was talking. I was like, all right. So look, the fact that you were servicing these customers, what do you feel like were some of the things that they did to make sure that they were prepared for the blitz, or did they do anything? Did they take any special precautions with you to make sure that they were prepared?
Some of the best carriers I worked with would have really robust practices for maintenance, not just during Blitz Week, but all the time. And they would be having training with their drivers of showing them this is how to pre and post trip your equipment. This type of education, this type of training, and getting even DOT officers or former DOT officers to train with your drivers just to show them this is what we're going to be looking for. And then in terms of maintenance for myself, what I did for my customers is we would go down to the yards and we'd have our trained mechanics, usually the couple weeks before the Blitz began. And we'd start walking through the equipment with the drivers and with the operation team to make sure that we're all going to be aligned when we're getting out there. We are putting our best foot forward. We're not going to give the DOT officers any more help than they need. We're going to make sure that these assets are going to be able to perform professionally and safely while meeting all the DOT requirements.
Gotcha. That sounds like a great service. Actually, it sounds like the fact that you were providing that service meant that you really cared for your customers and you wanted to prepare them for anything. That sounds like, though. Let me say it on this side. I work with a lot of smaller fleets. How do you feel as though they can get that type of one-on-one coaching, like how can they get prepared, if maybe they don't have the budget to outsource that type of tutorial?
We live in such an amazing time where you can find information online on things like YouTube, and you can see a good pre and post trip inspection. There are so many resources. So just to kind of give you an example, when I was having my mechanics do a pre trip or a post trip with my customer, it's usually a point 0.2 charge. It's 12 minutes. And so I'm charging the customer maybe $20, maybe probably less than that, to walk around the vehicle and show them what we're doing. But you can do that same thing online today. You can go online, you can watch videos that will show you here's what the DOT officers are going to be looking for. Because nobody wants you to come out there unprepared. No one's trying to sneak up on you and make it more difficult to do this incredibly difficult job. We want to help people be successful in every way we possibly can.
Agreed. I definitely hear you there, brother. I mean, and I think technology has gotten to the point where they actually have apps on the phone that also guide you through the pre and post trip checks, and just so it's just basically more opportunities, more resources that make it through. Um, my bad. My alarm just went off. To make it through those. those checks in the morning and in the evening. So yeah, I appreciate you talking about that. So when it comes down to it at this point, when it comes down to it at this point, what would you say is a benefit of being able to successfully go through an inspection?
The key here is you want to be talking about maintenance all the time. There is no size company that cannot have a safety first culture, and making sure that drivers are empowered to do the inspections, whether they use an app like you were talking about or just a paper inspection. Making sure that drivers feel empowered and they know that there's going to be accountability when things aren't safe. Because one of the big phenomena I've seen in my career is that drivers will start with an organization and they'll write up things that are wrong with the truck or things that they're finding. And then, management might say, I don't want to deal with that. Stop doing it. Stop writing it up. We're not going to take care of it. And you can always go in the right direction and be a safety first culture. And so what a successful inspection looks like is you've been practicing for this. You've been inspecting your truck and your trailer every single day for months. This is how it works, and you just know that when whatever level of inspection that the DOT is going to do with you, or the inspectors will do, you're ready for that. It's stressful, and the one thing I'll also mention is no one gets it perfect. You can have 2 or 3 mechanics walk the same truck multiple times, and they're all going to find different things. That's just the nature of how these kind of inspections, other than like solid measurements, they can kind of go both ways. So it's important just to not stress out about it. This is what happens every single year. It's going to continue to happen for every single year. And it's just getting ready to be prepared to be stopped and go through that process.
Right, right, right. And with your position, of a company that was servicing, providing maintenance for these fleets, did you ever have a reason to go into the different levels of the different inspections, like level one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight? Did you?
My my technicians, absolutely. So when we're doing these really in-depth inspections, whatever gets found has to be corrected, and the mechanic has to sign off on those things. So the drivers aren't the ones who are going to do these repairs. The repairs are going to be made by mechanics, whether it's their in-source mechanics or you've outsourced it to a travel center, to a mobile provider, to a tow provider. And so you have to know what to look for, because these components that fail are the ones you're going to have to replace. So the mechanics know what they're getting into when it comes to the levels of inspections that they're going to have to help their client deal with.
Yes, sir. Okay. So one of the things that I've kind of noticed as a dispatcher is, I'll have a fleet. They'll have an active authority. They'll be rolling. They'll be doing great. Have great reputations in the industry from all the brokers that they're moving loads for. But because they have not yet had an inspection, certain people don't necessarily want to work with them. They're saying, "Hey, you haven't had your feet to the fire yet. I don't know if you're really have enough skin in the game." Did your clients ever have to do anything that had to do with that? Is there a way to actually welcome inspection in order to get that street cred so you can work with everybody?
Well, ultimately, every single commercial vehicle has to have a federal inspection done. And in California, you also have your BITs, but these are things that just to make sure the asset is ready to perform services. So this is what every carrier is going to do anything anyway. When it comes to being investigated or inspected by the DOT, these are ad hoc inspections. These are not part of the normal maintenance process. The normal maintenance process, you may never have a vehicle inspected in a given year. I mean, sometimes you hit with a random at a weigh station, but typically there's millions of trucks and trailers that are out there running around, and there's not that many inspections taking place.
Right, right. I mean, last year I believe it was 40,000, and
Hmm.
I know there was a lot more truckers on the road than that. So I just wonder, though. Maybe it'd be one of those fun things of pulling up to a way station and requesting it. I don't know. Maybe that is something that could happen.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can request an inspection, and ultimately you can go to any DOT authorized. And the process for being an authorized inspector, when it comes to doing the federal annual inspections that you see on the side of a truck, it's governed by the FMCSA. But you can go to any of these places. Hey, can you give me an inspection real quick? And an inspection, when you're getting some of that done, like a dry PM inspection might be a 2-hour charge, but a DOT inspection might only be like 0.75. I always think in terms of decimals, but it might be a
Right.
45-minute inspection. Because I remember what you charge the customer. But yeah, a 45-minute inspection, walk around and see what is going on with your vehicle. And that is exactly what preventative maintenance is. The point of preventative maintenance is not to catch the problems right now. It's to say, here's where your tread depth is. We expect, based on how many miles you're going to drive over the next quarter, that you're going to need to start thinking about tires. We're going to start thinking about a new brakes. And that's the point of preventative maintenance, is to avoid the unplanned event, to avoid the being shut down because you haven't been maintaining your equipment.
Right. Do you feel as though you've gotten any tips or tricks on how to, get some of those pieces of equipment, the things that might need to be replaced in order for a motor carrier to be in compliance? Do you feel as though you've like found tips and tricks on how a motor carrier can get those at a very economical rate? Like something that you can might share here if folks need to go get certain things or services?
Yeah, the key here is always, when it comes to the types of things that go wrong, it's about the BLTs. I love BLTs. It's about brakes, lights, and tires. So when it comes to getting the best pricing for these different components, you want to make sure you're working with the bigger players. So someone like a Fleet Pride or a Rush Truck Centers. These are guys you want to set up accounts with and get relationships with. You can source so much when it comes to parts today online. When it comes to tires, travel centers are great ways to start talking about getting national accounts. So it depends on the size of your fleet, and that's the nature of this business generally, is the bigger you are, the more power you have in your buying power. But I would say, like, firms like Convoy and Uber have ways of giving incentives for their drivers with bulk buying and discounts for fuel cards and everything else in between that. If you're a private fleet, many times you can work with a fleet management company. These are companies like a lease plan or an ARI, and they also have discounts because they go out and they buy in such bulk. So there are ways to control your spend. The main thing to always do is, the best way to control spend is to get partners that you can keep in touch with, give them enough revenue so they care about the success of your company, and you keep them honest. You keep yourself being preventative as opposed to being fixing things after they've broken down.
Yes, sir. Hey, so I pray that folks have were able to get something from that to go ahead and start doing this proactively versus whenever it's a little bit too late. Yeah,
But
you got to be proactive, especially in this industry.
well, if you fail to plan to fail.
Yes,
Plan to
sir.
fail. You have to be proactive. Everybody's out there hustling when it comes to, there's a thing we talk in the industry about called multi-homing. Most truckers multi-home. And what that means is you're finding your loads all over the place, whether it's a load board, a shipper directly, a broker, or some sort of digital platform. And because they're so familiar with all these different ways of finding freight, many of these same platforms offer incentives and discounts of other ancillary things to run your business. When it comes to the cost of trucking, it's pretty straightforward. The biggest expense is your fuel. The second biggest expense is typically labor. The third biggest expense is typically the truck and the trailer itself. And then a distant fourth is your maintenance and your insurance and your tires, all kind of at the end of it. But these are the ways you got to control your spend. And when it comes to outside of safety week we're talking about, is about how do you save money for your truck itself. And one of the ways you can do that is not going as fast. When you travel slower, you're able to have less maintenance costs. You have better tire wear. You have better repair and maintenance costs overall. The only downside, and there are some downsides of going slower, is it takes you longer to get somewhere. So if you're being paid by the mile, maybe you're not going to be able to make as much as you would have before, but you will save money on these things like fuel and tires and the maintenance costs. So there are ways that you can control things even when it feels like you can't control anything.
Gotcha. And from the clients that you represented in the past, if you could just throw out a loose percentage, how many of them do you feel like had that governance on their motor, their engine, that did limit how fast it could go?
When it comes to over the road carriers, almost every single one of them. had some form of especially the larger carriers, had some form of speed regulation. Now, you could earn your way to faster speeds, and that was having a less amount of safety violations or hours of service violations or maintenance violations. But that is one of the things that was very, very common. The thing that we would see is oftentimes truck drivers asking us to take off the governor and plug in the computer, override the speed that's been inhibited. And of course, we could never do that.
Right.
but we did work with a number of fleets that had us come in and say, we need to put governors, we need to slow these things down. And it might be 68 miles an hour, it might be 70 miles an hour, but they would definitely put these things in. And I suspect as the next couple of years go by, we will see more use of technology to do that, to control the way that we move on the highways.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that you mentioned earlier was just the fact that as you go faster, you burn more fuel, and the way that fuel prices are soaring right now, that'll be the biggest way to limit one of those variable costs. Those variable costs.
You're 100% right. I mean, there's so little you can control as a driver. Maybe it's hard to find parking. Maybe it's hard to find a clean bathroom. Maybe it's hard to find a whole bunch of different things. But what you can control is how you operate that vehicle. And at the end of the day, there are so many distracted drivers all across this country on their cell phones. And as truck drivers, it's always our fault. It's never someone else's fault. They always look at us first. And so even by going slower, you increase your ability to stop, you increase your ability to move and navigate if someone's getting into your lane. So there are a lot of safety benefits to slowing down as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, look, let me ask this. I mean, this has not happened yet, but since you've been in the industry and, I feel like you're a pretty forward-thinking guy. How do you feel like the implementation of autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles are going to change or shift the way these international road checks are going to be conducted in the future? Have you ever thought about that?
I think about that all the time. That's a great question. Well, we go back to what are the biggest costs for trucking? The biggest cost is fuel. Second biggest cost is labor. So what does autonomous and electric do? It reduces the cost of fuel and it reduces the cost of labor. So when you're talking about an electric vehicle, you are talking about an engine with 60 to 80% less required maintenance. You're not talking about a motor that is having explosions happening in it. You're talking about a motor that is designed to be as few moving parts as possible. And so an electric motor will have no DEF problems, no regen issues, none of that. And you're going to have probably a little bit more wear on your tires, maybe more wear on your brakes, especially with regenerative braking. So you brake and it charges your battery up. The challenge for electric is that one, the infrastructure is not there. And where are you going to charge this? So the application, and what we talk about in the space of like that kind of technology is what's the use case? So the use case for an electric truck may not be over the road. It may be LTL. It may be a delivery company coming to your neighborhood because they have to go back home to charge. I suspect the travel centers will start having a lot more opportunities for electric vehicle charging, but it's still a ways off and it's expensive. I mean, these are trucks that are 2 or 3 times more expensive than a traditional diesel motor. And if you're talking about cost, that's a big barrier. That's a big barrier because the freight's not going to be more, you're not going to get more revenue for your freight just because you're using an electric vehicle. Now, there are a lot of subsidies every state puts out for these motors. So that trend of electrification is not going anywhere. Autonomous is interesting. So we have been talking about autonomous and different levels of automation for a really long time. And what I suspect is we are not going to have widespread autonomous vehicles for maybe a decade. That's my estimation. But you will have driver assistance for anti-collision. And that's where they get the sensors. That's how they start picking up the data. And the more data these vehicles have, the more useful that autonomous technology becomes. One great use case when it comes to autonomous is what they call like trackless trolleys or in the public transportation. Because in public transportation, you're going the same way every single day. The other really interesting use case for an autonomous vehicle is spotting trucks. Like I absolutely love terminal tractors. these yard dogs, goats, shunters, mules, horses, spotters, whatever you want to call them. And these
Okay,
vehicles,
I was like, my bad, not to interrupt. I was like, spotter truck, but you said all those other descriptors. I was like, oh yeah, I know those.
exactly. Every region in this country, this beautiful country, calls them different things.
Right.
You talk about them in the rail yards. They're called hostlers. I'm like, what is a hostler? That
What?
sounds yeah, exactly. Up in Canada, they call them shunt trucks. I'm like, a shunter? I've never heard of that. But in where I come from, we always call them spotters. So your Kalmar, your Tyco, your Capacity, these are beautiful vehicles, and they're at off-highway locations at a warehouse or distribution center. So there's a company called Outrider that is turning spotting trucks into robots. And a spotting truck runs 2 shifts a day minimum. These are things that are never stopping. So the use cases for autonomous are increasingly getting more places to try them. And I'm a big fan of it. One of my buddies uses Waymo, and there's this fascinating idea of what happens when a normal passenger vehicle collides with a bus piloted by a robot. How does the DOT officer or the cop, how do they investigate the scene? Who do they talk to if the company doesn't have a representative there? These questions are fascinating, and we don't have answers yet. They're still figuring it out.
Right. Are there any use cases of that?
Oh yeah, I mean these are so one of the things that we're going to see is like just like the truck has telemetry that communicates back to the shipper or to the dispatcher, here's where I am. That same technology will eventually speak to the DOT officers or to the police officers and say, here's the data of my vehicle. Here's how fast I was going. Here's the video. Here's who's liable. And that will happen. And what makes autonomous different than anything else we've ever dealt with in supply chain is that you have to program the machine to make decisions when life and death is at stake. So when you're driving a truck, you're not thinking, I'm going to make sure that if I'm in an accident, I'm going to swerve off the side of the road and take the hit myself and protect the civilians. But you do when you're in the moment. With a robot, you can't let it doesn't get to make that choice. You program it to make that choice. And so as of right now, most of the things that I've read and heard is that the desire of the way these things are engineered is to protect the driver. And so it will make a decision of who will be the victim of an accident based on the algorithm that the robot has. So these aren't going to be cases of negligence or things like that. These will be things like product liability. So the legal framework of autonomous vehicles is even more interesting than the autonomous vehicle itself.
Man, I never thought about it in quite that capacity, but it is all very interesting to say who and what, like what is the decision tree that has to go down in order for the robot, the autonomous vehicle, to decide to go off the road. Let's just say off a bridge versus go over to a shoulder where another car is just sitting, but it's only one car. You know what I mean? So yeah,
Absolutely.
that's
Well,
very interesting.
you can go back to that case in Colorado we were all hearing about a few
Yes.
months ago, where that driver who was at the time he was 23, but he was sentenced. It was 26 when he was sentenced. But this is a driver who's going 80 miles an hour down a mountainside, and he had the choice of rear-ending another tractor trailer, which would have likely caused him enormous damage. But instead, he took himself into the main road and had that, I think it was like a 26 car pileup with 4 fatalities, dozens of people who were injured. And the robot would make a different choice. Maybe, I don't know. And as time goes on, we as civilians and people in the industry will have a voice in how those decisions are made, because I guarantee you the DOT will mandate some aspect of these decision trees.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, yeah. To be honest, man, I definitely feel like that's a conversation that I would love to expound on. Once the that infrastructure bill starts really kicking out, and we're seeing how autonomous vehicles start infiltrating just our regular life. I'm definitely putting a pin in this conversation, and you would definitely be invited back to be the one, to speak on it. So, but yeah, man. What was that?
I think that sounds great. I'd love to. I look forward to it. We are just scratching the surface of what
Just
autonomous
scratching the
vehicles are going to do.
surface for sure. Just scratching the surface for sure, brother. Okay. So, and just to reset the room, if you will, which is definitely a clubhouse thing. It is International Road Check Week. It began yesterday and will go through tomorrow. And the focus on this bad boy is will ends. For you and the things that you used to replace on a very regular basis for your customers, what would you say comprises the will end?
That's a great question. So the wheel end itself is not just the tire. It's not just the hubcap. It's not just the lug nuts and the brake chambers and the brake drum. It goes into the camshaft. It goes into the axle. So these are the things that are where what allows the vehicle to stop, allows the vehicle to move, allows the vehicle to be safely operated. So the things you're looking for in the very highest senses is tire tread depth and brake lining. These are really easy to see things. But even the airlines that power those brakes, like the separators, a very, very common defect is when the hoses are touching each other. Those hoses can't touch each other. They have to have hose tenders or the springs that hold the hose tenders up. So these are very simple wearable items that are easily written up that cause big problems. But even like if you see a lug nut and you see like a stream of what it might be looking like grease or dirt, that could be a lug nut backing off. So there's technologies today that you can get that will show you if those lug nuts are moving at all. And at the end of the day, when it comes to wheel end maintenance, this is when you're looking for things like wheel seals leaking or seeping. So this the oil or the grease inside the axle could be leaking out from that wheel seal. So these are very typical things to look for when it comes to wheel end maintenance. It's not just the tire, it's not just the brake, but it's all these other kind of components that comprise that entire wheel and that hubcap and everything. But the main thing to do, like I mentioned before, is preventatively maintain things. I mean, it is important to continually inspect these things. I usually recommend quarterly to have an actual mechanic inspect a vehicle, but other fleets might say every 6 months. The DOT requirements for inspections is once a year. And what that is being asked of that inspector is to say, is it compliant right now? That inspector is not asked the question, will this be compliant in 6 months? There's no way a technician is going to know that vehicle will be compliant in 6 months. So it is important for anybody in the supply chain and everyone who's listening to us right now to understand that maintenance is not something you do sporadically. It is about consistency, and it is about making sure it's process driven. So if you have a PM compliance, so you want to inspect vehicles at a certain cadence, and you miss those deadlines, you have to know why. So typical in our industry to say, well, freight's really high right now. Can't stop. Can't park the truck. Freight doesn't stop. Can't park the truck. Can't get inspections done. And then the moment things slow down, I'm going to take a break. We'll get back to doing the inspections once freight picks up again. There's never a time to delay this stuff. It's get a schedule and stick to that schedule.
Yes, sir. I think that you hit it right on the head, especially the mindset of these major corporations. And I feel as though they've had the use cases to realize why sticking to that schedule is so important, so critical to the overall success of that vehicle and keeping those maintenance costs down. For the, since you have experience on, with providing these services to larger fleets, maybe or maybe not you have, or maybe you don't have the ability to see it from the stance, the point of a small fleet, and when I say a small fleet, I'm talking about the mother who I dispatch for, who drives one box truck, you know what I mean, and she needs to get that bad boy serviced on a regular basis. Do you have like folks or organizations that you would say would be probably the best partners to perform those preventative, those quarterly, those scheduled maintenance?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it depends on what your appetite is. So if you're thinking, I want to have the shop come to me, I want the shop to come to where I'm at. These are mobile maintenance providers. That's been my real skill set has been in the mobile maintenance business.
Okay.
So some great companies that can do fantastic mobile maintenance. Companies like Dickinson Fleet Services, Merit Fleet Solutions, Prestige Fleet Services. These are three great players. But there's also the travel centers. So your TAs, your Pilot Flying J, and your Loves. These guys also offer some level of mobile maintenance. Now, if you're in the space of doing it and bringing it to a shop, there's a lot of great resources. I'll use an example, a company called Servicase or NTTS. Both of these companies are just websites. You go to the website and you'll get a list of providers in your area. And sometimes they'll have the price of what they charge, and they'll have some ratings of how they've performed. The aftermarket's a great place. So companies like Fleet Pride, I look at and say, this is a great maintenance company. Penske and Ryder do have mobile and they do have shops, but they're typically going to be working on their own equipment, not really doing a lot of work from outside. Dealerships have a place, but there's not a single fleet that I've ever dealt with that says, I want to take my truck to a dealer for maintenance. Unless it's under warranty, there's really no big value prop to go to a dealership. It's very expensive. There's a lot of time delays with them turning things. So the aftermarket's where I typically look at. And aftermarket repair maintenance is my bread and butter. So there's a lot of great companies doing amazing work that have fantastic technicians.
All right. Yeah. Hey, man, I appreciate you going in depth on that bad boy, because I think the community, whether they're listening now or going to be listening later, will be Googling those organizations to see if they can set up accounts. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe you said NTTS. Is that what you
Yeah.
said?
Yeah, so NTTS, it's a website. I think it might be NTTS Breakdown or something like that. So what NTTS does, so I'm going to talk about maintenance for a minute. In the world of unplanned maintenance, the biggest players in that space are companies like FleetNet America or TTN. And these are companies that you call and you pay a fee to call them. And then there's a whole bunch of other costs that happen. These are very interesting companies, but there's free versions of those same things online. You can get information about service providers. And so NTTS is one of them. There's another one called Truck Down. There's another one called Servicase, SERVICASE.com. And these are just taking what we know about maintenance providers and consolidating them online. So you can find out what their services that they have that are available, sometimes what their rates are. And again, the travel centers, people see them all the place because they're so pervasive. But many of those travel centers also offer upfront pricing of what they're going to charge you for what you're getting. In maintenance, the goal and what every tier of every size should know, we know the cost of everything. We know exactly what we're going to charge you for what it is you're looking to do. Sometimes we don't want to tell you over the phone, or sometimes we don't publicize it, but you can ask questions like, what is the labor rate? What's the standard repair time for this service? So if you're talking about trailers, for example, I know replacing a 7-way is a 0.75. It takes half an hour. That's what people typically charge. If someone says it takes 1.5, no way. I know that's not right. Changing a glad hand's a 0.25. It's not more than 15 minutes. I guarantee it. So it's one of these things in maintenance where you get to a place where you just think about what it is you're going to do, and these providers that do maintenance and do repair are going to be able to tell you that. They're going to tell you up front, this is what it's going to cost. This is my parts markup. These are questions you get to ask to understand what it is that you're actually going to have to pay for.
Yes, sir. Hey, man. Again, the fact that you're able to go in depth about these topics, I think that is very, very great information, because some people do not have this background. Especially since this was the golden age of trucking and rates were so high and everybody just knew you can make money with a truck. A lot of people stopped their 9 to 5, whatever they were specialized in, to jump in this market. And these are just some of the things, the auxiliary, the peripheral pieces that they would need to know, but just didn't have the time to pick it up before they got into the industry. So again, thank you for sharing. And I do know that there's some fleet owners in the audience. I'm not sure if anybody wanted to share their experience this so far with the Blitz this week. If you've already had any, if you've already been inspected, if not, cool. But I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that I was very, very open to hearing about some of the stories from this current year's Blitz. And also with that, I'm going to transition just a bit because, although you have a lot of experience on the maintenance side of, of things in transportation, by trade, by schooling, you are also an attorney. Is that correct?
That's right, absolutely.
All right. So with that, what type of law were you practicing, or what type of law do you specialize in?
So the law that I practiced when I was doing it full time was really around liability for trucking companies in catastrophic accidents, manufacturers' liability, and then just general business things like formations of business, acquisitions and mergers. These are the things that I had my practice in, and then a little bit as it got older, labor law, so employment contracts and things like that. And that was my main wheelhouse of my practice in law.
Gotcha. All right. And look, when it came to, transportation and things of that nature, did you have anything that was just completely odd, wonky, something that stood out to you, a case or a situation that you had to advise someone through legally that you can talk about now? If you can't talk about it, cool. If nothing is exciting, we can even go to the next question.
Yeah. Oh, no, no. I love this question. One of the things that I represent was a lot of small trucking companies. And when you're a small trucking company, it can be up to 3 to 4% of your total revenue goes to paying for insurance. And so the mandatory amounts of insurance for most carriers is under $1 million. Now, in the world of personal injury, $1 million goes away really fast. And I remember I had a case where a driver had inadvertently, negligently hit into a driver of a little Mustang, and the driver had her pelvis destroyed. And the liability for that was well over the insurance that the carrier had. And
Hmm.
so the thing about the average life in the United States, and this is actually there's a DOT thing you can look up online of how valuable a human life is when they do their calculations. And a human life is about $11 million. And so
What?
yeah, man, it's the statistical valuation of human life. If you look that up, that phrase up, there's a thing in the Department of Transportation, and that is the number that they use as they make calculations of the rules that they make. So the statistical valuation of human life is about $11 million. And no trucking company, not many small truck companies, I should say, carry that much insurance. Most of them don't. Most carry $1 million, maybe an extra couple $1 million umbrella policy.
The
And
most I've seen is 7 million, and that was
yeah,
the umbrella policy.
any death will likely be over that amount, almost every single time. And we saw a case not long ago here in Illinois where a trucker, whether he fell asleep or lost control, went across the median and had a head-on collision with another vehicle. And the person who was hit was a father of 4, and that person perished instantly. And that trucking company declared bankruptcy very soon after that. The reality is that a human life is very, very expensive. And when you don't have that kind of insurance that can cover that, this is what in the law business we call bet the farm litigation. What we call in our supply chain, we call these nuclear verdicts. Anytime a verdict is over $10 million, we then call them a nuclear verdict. The biggest trucking companies in the world can handle these types of verdicts. They can handle that level of liability. Most trucking companies cannot. And the DOT, the types of insurance you're required to carry, like you said, it's not over $10 million required. The most insurance is going to be $1 million policy and maybe an umbrella. So these types of things are horrifying because no one wins when there's a catastrophic accident. No one wins. But
No
it's
one.
really, and the money doesn't bring back life. Like when I was doing the law, I was doing civil litigation, so not criminal work. And in civil litigation, the only thing I can do is help identify money. Money does not bring back the dead. And those are very hard things to do. Those are very hard cases to handle.
Yes, sir. Man, wow. Thank you for sharing. The crazy thing is when you said 11 million, I was like, man, it should be more. That's what I was thinking. That's what I
Oh
was.
man, I mean, we look at as a lawyer. I mean, lawyers are kind of a weird breed, but when we look at human life, this is all statistics. When you talk about workers' compensation law, for example, it's the same basic idea. It's taking what you know about the human body and the anatomy and the earnings that a person has, the loved ones that they support and that they keep in contact with, and then you start working backwards and say, how much is that life worth? And it's a question not many people think about, but in the law, especially in these types of products liability or civil liability, you think about death a lot. You think about the value of human life a lot. And after doing it for enough time, that's why I left the practice. I didn't really enjoy how I felt. And that's when I got into supply chain, working in the maintenance business. It was a lot less terrifying, a lot less stressful, even though supply chain is always stressful.
Yes, sir. I can hear you, but it's probably not as stuffy as the previous industry was.
That's right.
Yes, sir. Okay, so thank you for sharing the background. And you did mention another thing about just labor and contract law. And this day and age, this thing is going around that is getting a lot of attention in supply chain, the non-compete. All right, and
Hmm.
some people even throw in the non-solicitation in the same sentence, the same breath. And I know the general opinion of the industry for that type of agreement. So I'm going to ask you a question a little bit differently. And it's going to be, when are non competes and when are non solicitation agreements appropriate?
The only time that these documents are appropriate is if you are paid separately for them. And what I mean by that is that these documents require what's called in the legal business separate consideration. So very often someone's presented with this document and they say, you need to sign this non-competition or you need to sign this non-solicitation and then you can come work for me. And I think that's inappropriate. The reason these things exist is they are a special type of contract called a post-employment restrictive covenant. That's a post-employment. You're no longer there. Restrictive. You are giving something to your employer. You are giving up some of your rights. And it's a covenant. It is a contract. So you are contracting, you are covenanting to your current company that in the future, you are not going to have a specific right. And if you're going to do that, if your employer wants you to do that, they should have to pay for those things. And if they are unwilling to pay for those things, they shouldn't get them because we all are at will, generally speaking. We can be fired because it's Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, but that contract follows you. And any new employer you go to will ask you, do you have any post-employment restrictive covenants? And if you don't have them, or if you have them and don't disclose them, you lose your job. And so I look at the example of if you're dating somebody, and let's say you get along with that person, but you say, you know what, we're just not a good fit. I think we should see other people. And the other person in that relationship looks at you and says, you know what, I agree with you. But by the way, for the next 2 years, I want you to see no one at all who is like me. It's absurd. It's absurd. It's unethical. And in my opinion, it's an abuse of our legal system. So to answer your question, when are they appropriate? If you get paid for it. If you don't get paid for it, you should not have to sign it.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so if there was a severance package, everything should is okay. Everything is fine. But if it's just a slap on the hands, a handcuff saying that you can't to restrict using the words that you've already said, that's not when it's okay. If you're paid for it, okay, but not if it's just restricting you from moving freely.
Absolutely. And when I look at this is it's either a sign-on bonus, and I mean, if you're presented with these things, this is a negotiation. You get to negotiate with your future employer and say, look, if you want me not to do my job, let's say it's a non-competition agreement, I want $30,000. I want 20,000 bucks. Otherwise, I'm not signing it. That's perfectly reasonable. And for that severance agreement, the way I look at these documents, it should be 1 month for every year that you've worked at that company. The case we talk about a little bit is that 4 Kites in Project 44, where a person who was there for 6 months had a 1-year non-competition agreement. They went over to work at Project 44, and then they saw a sheriff who came to them and delivered the process paper saying, you have been sued. And that's, again, horrible. It's horrible that you might lose your job or be sued to support your family because the company you chose to work with wasn't a good fit for you. Again, I think they're useful documents and there's a time and place for them. But in the United States, between 30 and I've even heard 50 million people have signed some form of a non-competition or non-solicitation agreement, never having a chance to review the documentation, ask questions, or be able to seek outside advice from a lawyer. It's a complete abuse of how these contracts were designed to be used.
Gotcha. So you said something interesting. Um, you know, if all right, so I did see something from Cassandra Gaines, and she said that all right, it presented itself like this whole entire thing presented itself to her when she was offered stock options. The company wanted to give her stock, and in that agreement came along this non-compete. So are with you saying maybe a bonus up front, being able to negotiate a bonus, you're saying that, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Do you think that that's something that is kind of easily done for most people to be able to position it like, all right, I'll sign this bad boy, but in order for me to feel comfortable, you have to pay me additional monies on the front end of things? Is that, how do you actually work that into the conversation?
That's a great question, and I have had these conversations with so many of my friends who will email me or call me and say, "Hey, Matt, I got an offer, but I just don't know what to do. They have these documents in front of me, and they say I have to sign them." And I say, "You got to negotiate them." I say, "Well, I don't know how to negotiate." That's okay. I'm going to teach you how to do it. So the first thing to do when you're presented with these documents is ask for time to review them. Say, I need a couple days. Give me the weekend. Give me a week. I need to look at these things, because in those contracts, it actually says, almost all of them will say some version of this, that you have had time to consult with a lawyer. Even if you haven't been given time, the contract says that you have. So take the time and look at them. Now, these documents, there's 3 things that really matter. How long does the document go for? Is it a week? Is it a month? Is it a year? Is it 5 years? And then how wide, how geographically expansive are these documents? Is it your city, your state, your country, the world? Where can you not go to do your job? And then the last part, if it's a non-competition, is what is the business that you can't do? So it might say, like, there's a good example. People used to sign non-competition agreements for working at a sandwich shop. And the non-comp would say, you can't go make sandwiches in a 3-mile radius of this business. And these contracts generally aren't enforceable, but most people don't know that. And so they sign them and they're afraid of being sued. So the first thing that you do when you get these documents is ask for more time. Once you've had the time, the best thing that I recommend people do is say to the person who's hiring you, hey, can you explain to me why I have to sign this? Why do I have to sign this document? Let them justify to you why you have to sign it. And now, if they say, look, we need to make you sign, or you can't have a job here, because that might happen. But it also may happen, it's happened to me, where some people on my team, my colleagues, will have non-competition agreements, but I don't. And the reason why I don't is I ask the question, why do you need this? And if they say, well, we make everyone sign it, I say, well, I don't want to sign it. Then they might say, well, never mind then, forget about it. And then you get to move on. But if you have to sign the document, then this is when you say, well, look, if I'm going to sign this thing, I'm giving you something. What are you going to give me? Because we all have gotten used to negotiating for salary. We negotiate for time off. So we should negotiate for these documents. So again, first thing, ask for time. Second thing, ask them to explain why. And then if you have to do it, ask them for separate consideration. Ask them for something in exchange, like stock or more time off or more money, whatever you want to ask. And in the non-solicitation case, and I say this to everybody who's a salesperson, effective salespeople do not give their relationships to their future employer. The future employer rents them from you because you own that relationship. And so it is important to say, these are the customers that are not going to be bound by these non-solicitations because I brought them, they're mine. And you can do that too. But we have got to train people to negotiate on their own behalf. Our employers are not our friends. They are there to maximize shareholder value, which is very important. But if you get presented with these things, this is time to get your negotiating skills up. It's to say, I don't want to sign it. What are you going to give me to do it? Now, I will also mention a couple little caveats. One thing is, most companies will not tell you that they're going to make you sign these things. That's why when you're applying for a job and you get the people saying, yeah, we'd like to bring you in for an interview or something. You say, yeah, that sounds great. I can't wait to learn more about your company. I'd like to know more about other things I have to do to work here. Are there documents that I have to sign? Maybe I can see a handbook or see the benefits package. Or are there any post-employment restrictive covenants, non-competes or non-solicits? And you want to know these things up front because if they're there, you don't want to have to deal with it. One of the things that I'm a part of is this movement called End Non-Competes. So you can go to the website, endnoncompetes.com, and you can learn about different ways our industry is seeking to stop the use of non-competition agreements. So there are companies that are out there now marketing and talking about how they provide a more flexible work experience. And my goal is that if enough companies realize that non-competition agreements are both bad for your shareholders, but they're bad for your customers, then eventually they'll realize that they're bad for the employee and they got to stop doing them.
Right. Let me ask this question. You know what I mean? Because I, like I said, I understand the industry's perspective on non-competes. But let me ask it in this type of way about proprietary information. You know, maybe it's not just a relationship with a customer or a shipper that someone is taking that could go to a new organization and leverage that relationship with that new company. What if it's literally like proprietary, confidential, things that have best practices that have enabled this company to just become the best, a disruptor by in certain capacities. And it's those things that they're saying, hey, you can't take that information and share it because it's private, it's confidential, it's proprietary. Is that different than,
It is different, but you've hit on another type of post-employment restrictive covenant. And this one is the least objectionable. This is what we call the non-disclosure agreement. If you get access to proprietary, confidential, or trade secrets, you are bound not to release those things. That is totally reasonable. Now, I will push back on some things. Because a lot of companies go, well, the names of the customers, that's proprietary, or the rates are proprietary. And I'm going to tell you, none of that stuff is proprietary. Google knows more about your customer than you ever will. And you have companies like IHS Market or Zoom Info or just plain Google or LinkedIn. And you can find the information about any company, any person, any contacts. And in terms of pricing, of what things are. I mean, I'm looking at like freight prices generally. There's an entire industry that just says, here's the price for moving these things. Here's the price of that lane. So what people think is proprietary may not actually be proprietary. But if there's some algorithm or some strategy or process that no one else has ever seen before, then it would be protected. But that's a non-disclosure agreement. That wouldn't be the same as the non-solicit or the non-competition. But I will say that most of the time, that non-competition and that non-solicitation are simply paragraphs within the non-disclosure. So you'll be presented with an NDA, and you'll go, oh, it's an NDA. We sign them all the time. Let me sign it. And in that document will be buried that non-competition and non-solicitation. And ignorance is not a defense. If you sign that, you will likely be bound by it. So it's important to take the time to read these documents if you can.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, okay. Well, I mean, I feel as though I just have so many different questions. I feel as though I could even go further into this topic. But I did want to just respect your time. I did want to say thank you so much for joining, and I did want to just open it up. I'm gonna say 30 seconds. If there's anyone in the audience that had a question that would like to come up and speak, I'm leaving the floor open for 30 seconds. So please go ahead and raise your hand. All right. I'm excited. Hey, Gracie Pooh, how are you? Grace, what's up?
You're muted, Grace.
Muted? Hold on. My question was, isn't Matt the coolest guy ever?
How are you doing, Grace? How's your
I'm doing
evening?
good. Oh, doing good. Go green.
Go white. We did it.
Yeah, I knew that. I knew the relationship was there. I saw that Matt was, on the board for the law school there at that. I was like, okay, we have some connection here. So what's up, Grace? How you feeling?
I'm doing good. I jumped right off the radio show to this, and this was just super informative. And Matt, your insight is so broad that it's such a good show today. I'm excited for you, Jory.
I appreciate it. And we definitely support you. Love what you got going on the Sirius FM Daily Show. Is that Monday through Friday?
Yeah, Monday through Friday, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, or replays at 11 to 1 as well. So,
Gotcha, man. It was so exciting being on that show. You're such a professional. I felt so proud just hearing you speak. You had your radio voice on.
I know, right? I love it.
I loved it. I loved it. Man, I loved it. So, but yeah, I appreciate you coming up to the stage. And if there was anybody else that wanted to say anything, please come up now. All right. All right. All right. Hey, what's up, Kevin? How you doing today, brother?
Doing well. Super fun to hop on the show today. I really appreciate it. Matthew, I loved your take on the autonomous truck. That's something I've been thinking about for quite some time. I love the perspective of, I think there's a lot of upskilling that needs to be done around when autonomous trucks come along. And I think it also seems to be going to be like a long cycle until that really, takes on the trucking industry. I really appreciate your perspective, and would love to see a future episode with you and Jory talking about that too.
Well, thank you so much. I find autonomous fascinating. Companies like Gatik working with Walmart to bring you things to your house through robots, through automation. And we know that the future is going to be this autonomous, connected, electric, shared vehicles, different types of ownership. It's a fascinating topic, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, definitely, fellas and madam. Well, look, we appreciate everybody for joining, for supporting the Transportation and Logistics Clubhouse. We are almost at 25,000 members. And, I remember when it was just me in here by myself. So the fact that we're here now, I just have so many people to thank, and definitely thank God. And then I'm going to thank my wife for the support and Grace for writing that Freight Waves article because that was also during the time that we were at a very critical time. Do we continue to put in all the time and the energy to make sure that we're bringing value? And that right there was one of those affirmations that, yep, we're doing it right. So again, we couldn't do this without you guys. What's up, Grace? Go ahead.
I'm going to say, heck yeah, you're killing it. That's it.
No, appreciate it. Appreciate it. All right. So next week is going to be one of those events where we just have folks from the club, from the Transportation and Logistics Clubhouse, come on and promote themselves. It's called Plug Yourself. I'm wanting folks to come up to the stage Let us know who you are, what you do. Maybe, if you have some insights that you want to share, great. If you have some opportunities that you want to share, cool. But also come willing to be vulnerable. Where are you? Where are your failure points, or the things that you're hurting at right now? Because I guarantee you, somebody has done it already, and they successfully gotten where you past where you are right now, and they might be able to guide you. You just got to be willing to share where you are so they can know exactly where to help you. So that's definitely been my experience, using Clubhouse as a way of saying, hey, I want this, but I have this amount of experience and I don't know how to get to this next level. Being vulnerable and open has definitely enabled me to get that information. So definitely come next week prepared to share what you got going on. And, I'll just see you guys next week, on Monday, 7:30. We're partnering with Freightwaves again, bringing on the Sonar team. So definitely excited about that. So outside of that, I appreciate everybody that's on the stage, and everybody have a blessed week. All right, Matt, have a good one, brother.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Take care.
You too.
Appreciate you, Jory. Later, brother.
No doubt, Kevin.